Hello and welcome. We are joined by P Gurnani, Chairman of NASSCOM this year, also Managing Director and CEO of Tech Mahindra. And we're going to talk about what's happening in America and why we should be concerned about it, or why is it affecting some of our projections. Treat this more like a classroom question, Mr. Gurnani. Why is Trump, or what has Trump doing or done that has fundamentally changed the equations for India's IT industry?
So I think it's many times, we come to conclusions without actually waiting for a process to be completed. That in reality, bills have been introduced in the past, and many of them have been, not considered by the Congress. So let's again, as I said, let's go back to the basics. The fundamental thing is that no business ever happens till there is a demand. That a US economy needs technology people because they do not have their own technology, and they've come up with these words which are called STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, maths people. Number two is that all the words that you hear about the change that are happening are progressive mathematics. When you talk about artificial intelligence, it is being able to correlate data at a much faster pace than anybody else would do. Deep machine learning, it is just that the machine is learning a little harder, faster. So my submission to you is to take two fundamental facts. There is no industry. So when you go into a healthcare, you are talking about computational biology. You're talking about genomes. That it is a reality that President Carter, when he had his cancer, he did his genome analysis and figured out that his chances of his success, if he takes the medicine ABC based on the genome analysis, so actually he got targeted medicine, and that is why his cancer is no longer a danger.
So you're saying the role of technology.
So role of a
discounted.
technology is in every industry.
Sure.
Now, if there is a role of technology, and if America Incorporated has a demand, number one. Number two is America is not consuming everything that they produce. They are also net exporters. So, in my opinion, India Incorporated is the new global force. India Incorporated has invested in smart capital, and both of us will make this a good, successful combination. And I personally believe that all these rhetorics regarding, Indian industry or an American consumption, I think is not practical at all, because ultimately both countries need each other to make each other successful.
Right. So even as a reaction, I mean, there seems to be a lot of focus on those 63,000 or 65,000 H-1B visas. So why does it sometimes come across as if the entire IT industry's fate depends only on those engineers who go on site and execute?
No, so there is a fundamental part to the business. The fundamental part to a business is that you need local presence to understand what the requirements are, so that you can use the global workforces. So when a Tech Mahindra executes a project, it is not only from India, it could be from Brazil, it could be from Malaysia, because again remember, my customer is global also. So, but you need somebody locally present so that they can not only understand, but in today's environment, speed and agility can also be brought to the fore. And it has always been a model which is, that's why the word on-site offshore came in. Right. It doesn't matter whether we call it a co-development or whether we call it a co-create, or we call it an R&D or we call it digitalization. The point here is that without an interaction, you cannot create a product. And if you can't create a product, then that is why you need a proper license for a person to work there, or to understand what the work is and is to bring it back to one of the software factories around the world.
But you know, we are saying $154 billion of exports. Now, to what extent? I'm sort of asking this question again so that we can bring out the clarity. Is it dependent on those 60,000 people sitting in the US, Indians or Indian origin software engineers working for Indian IT companies?
So one is $155 billion industry. Out of this, export industry would be probably be about 115 billion. Out of this 115 billion, US dependent would be probably be about 55%, 60%. So we're talking of $50–60 billion industry. And you have to also remember there are a lot of people who have gone and have already been working. This 65,000 is on a yearly basis.
Right.
So I am not saying that we cannot work with, because there's always a pipeline and it doesn't dry up in one day. But you need to have a continuous pipeline because it is a growth business. Even this year, Gartner predicts that the technology industry will grow by 5%.
As opposed to 6% last year.
Yeah, so if you want to grow it, you need to have continuous population which is working on it. And America Incorporated does not have engineers that I can use. I need to reskill a lot of them, and hopefully the government will realize that Indian IT industry is committed to reskilling people in US, but it will take some time, 6 months to 18 months, for us to build that pipeline.
Right. So
And you have to be willing also.
Right. So IT industry is written on disruption. In this case, let's say assuming IT industry is being disrupted by a force which it did not quite anticipate, right? The election of Donald Trump, the de-globalization. So how is the industry now gearing up for this?
I mean, different companies will have their own strategies. And I can only say is that the chances are then you will start going into platforms, the chances are you will start going into alternate business model of software as a service. The chances are that you will use cloud to, serve the clients, and the chances are that you will also adopt more collaborative methods of computing. They've always existed. It is not that it is the first time. Cisco always had a telepresence. I mean, you always had a Skype. You always had a Zoom.us. I mean, it's a question now is that are you going to? So I'll give you one of my clients. I actually work with him on the YouTube. I mean, you think your industry is disintermediated. I know of a client which is basically says, I will do a classroom session on a YouTube. Let your guys download on that secure platform. And from that platform, let your guys come to know what I want. I mean, he doesn't even want to get into a regular, a dialogue kind of a mode. Right. So there will be different ways to address it.
Right. So what's the bigger concern here? That one, that the industry has been caught unawares, which many industries all over the world, I mean, and not just industries, but let's say countries have been caught unawares. Or is it that it's the nature of disruption this time which perhaps is far more dramatic than ever before?
I think it is just a matter of a few combinations. Number one, I would say, is digital disruption, and the rate of change is faster. Number two is automation or AI platforms. Number three, I think, is not knowing what to expect, and these bills being introduced almost at the same time. And number fourth is that the world over there are new elections going to happen, and particularly the Western world. So it started with Brexit. Now you know that you're going to have an election in France. You know you will have an election in Germany. So it is.
Could become 100 billion.
Yeah. And at the same time, as I said, that there is also foreign currency, volatility. So it's just that, the world has been ready for at least knowing that it is going to be a VUCA world. It is just that when it happens, I mean, I may not lose my sleep, but somebody else is losing the sleep. And I think it is important that I communicate that we may not always know the answers beforehand, but we are capable people, we have seen the change in the past, and we will ride this change also.
Right. So, you've been talking about reskilling and all the challenges that go with some of those elements that you talked about, whether it's artificial intelligence or automation, robotics, and everything that the industry has to do. So, you've got all of that on one end, and then you've got this new geopolitical factor on the other end. Between the two, what do you think the industry will ride out more easily in the next year or so?
I personally would like to put my vote behind reimagining the product service offerings. Number two is that hope and use every office in the world to say, we are not the problem, we are actually the solution. And we will be able to communicate harder that we are actually the solution. I'm not talking only America. In America, you have the slogan, Make America Great Again. And I think we are part of the solution.
So, if I were to ask you to give a 2017-18 prognosis, not guidance perhaps, but I mean NASSCOM for instance has held back from giving an annual guidance because you want to see what's happening, how things are going to play out in America and maybe even in other parts of the world including Europe. But if you were to, if I were to ask you without taking the word guidance out, what else can you predict today?
I think it's a healthy growth. I mean 8 to 10% is a healthy growth. By not giving guidance, we have only said is that we are not assuming it is going to go beyond 10%. We are not assuming that it will go much below 8%. So we are saying that we are pretty much in the ballpark, and even if I were to look at 8 to 10%, it's a healthy growth, and it is still higher than what Gartner is expecting 5% increase in the technology spend. So I am actually very upbeat and positive because it is higher than the Gartner results or the prognosis, and there are obstacles, but none of them which is unsurmountable.
Right. So last question. So Gartner went from 2.6 to 5%. That increase of 2.4%. To what extent does it translate into gains for Indian IT, in your understanding, and to what extent does it not?
We have done that analysis, and we believe that most of this spend is happening on digital front. Much of it will also happen because you have to remember, I mean, SAP went and bought companies worth $35 billion so that they can run it from the cloud, which effectively means is that out of this 5%, I'm assuming 2 to 3% has gone to the product, and another 1 or 2% is what are likely to be the global outsourcing industry, our ratio being 56% there. So we're talking of 1.2% coming to us, and as would like to believe is that 1.2% in that large industry is a reasonable chunk.
That's an optimistic note to end on. Thank you so much, Mr. Gurnani.
Thank you, Govind. Thank you.